Okay.
Okay, so I think that we can start. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. First of all, please stay on mute or put yourself on mute if you're not, so we don't have any background noise during the presentation. If you have questions for the author, please put them in the chat so we can ask her the questions after the presentation. My name is Elena Frigenti. I'm from the office of Noia, and I immediately pass the torch to our chair, Pat Tinto, who will introduce our author tonight.
Thank you, Eleanor. Many of you may have known Eleanor from your contacts with the office. She holds us together and does all our invitations and communications. So if any issues, you'll contact Eleanor at the office or one of us. But anyway, welcome tonight. I'm very happy to see you here. We had over 30 people sign up, but they're not all on now, but I think we can start because it's 7:04 p.m. and we have a good program that we should proceed with. As she said, I'm Pat Tinto. Up until last week, I guess I was the president of Noia. Now we've had some transition to new leadership. I am now the chair of the board. And Amory Datello from Rhode Island is another vice chair and secretary, and our treasurer is Vicky Patry from Connecticut. So we're representing 3 states on the board. None of us are from New York, though. I'm actually in Florida. But if you we'd love to get to know people more. If you can just put in the chat box, where you're calling in from or what your region affiliation is, we'd appreciate it. I'm just looking if we have some other members of the board. Right now we have Betty Santangelo, our former chair and chair of programs, is joining us.
How are you?
Hi, Betty. Oops, I just lost one of my, sorry. This is new for me to be the host. So I'm doing 2 dual functions. I'm trying to get this over. Anyway, but thank you all for coming in tonight. And it's a little bit late, but we want to get started. Many of you may already know Linda Cardillo. She's been an active Noia member for a long time, and she's an award-winning author calling to us from Western Massachusetts. She has done presentations for us in almost all of our regions. Excuse me, and she helped 2 years ago start the Boston branch, which I see Liz from Dudu Ellen is joining us. She was one of the other leaders of the group. We have a new leader taking over there soon. But wherever you're from, you can connect with us virtually or through your local region. If there is one, let us know any questions you have about future programs. But tonight, Linda, excuse me, has started her writing career back, I forget how many years ago, but her first 2 books were devoted to the story of Italian immigrants, something very close to our own mission. One was Dancing on Sundays, about her grandmother's experiences coming to this country as an immigrant. And then the other one, Across the Table, about Italian-American families in the North End of Boston. So she writes a lot of things that are relevant to our mission, again, as I said, but she recently launched Paint the Wind, and I think she's on tour now. A number you might catch her on that book, a number of other cities. But tonight she's going to help us understand more of our heritage and the culture of Italian art and history from the Renaissance. Many of us know the famous men in the landscape. Besides Lorenzo de Medici, but Leonardo da Vinci, the artist, Michelangelo, the sculptor. Linda has done 2 books about the women behind the men, or the women who really inspired them in many ways, who for themselves were their own leading ladies of the Renaissance, but they never really get any of the credit. So Linda is going to actually explain to us about the story of 2 women, and I will hopefully at the end you'll have questions we can go over, but I don't want to delay the start too much. We have a lot of people joining us now, so why don't we go straight to Linda in Boston, in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Pat. I'd like Elena, if you could put up the opening slide of my presentation, and on the present. There we go. Okay. So, first of all, thank you everybody for signing up. I'm delighted that you're here, and hope that you'll find some interesting information about these two women, and I hope you'll have lots of questions. So I'll just plunge right into it. Several years ago, when I was encouraged to consider writing historical fiction, I didn't hesitate in identifying a focus. My Italian heritage drove my choice. I grew up immersed in the rich culture of Italy, the art, the music, the food. So the decision to set my foray into historical fiction in Italy was easy. But the hard part came next: how to narrow the vast panoply of Italian history into one sharply defined story. I started with art, thinking that I'd explore the possibility of a woman artist. And I was excited to find that there was more than one potential heroine, women artists in the Renaissance. But I was equally dismayed to learn, with only a bit further exploration, that many books had already been written about them. So I went back to my research and discovered something quite unexpected. One scholarly article led me to Vittoria Colonna, an influential patron of the arts in the 16th century and one of the century's most celebrated poets. And what Victoria led me to was a vibrant circle of powerful and fascinating women. They were intensely close-knit, linked by blood, marriage, and the island duchy of Ischia. Exemplars of the Italian philosophy of la bella figura, they use their beauty, intelligence, and wealth to shape not only their own narratives, but the cultural, political, and religious thought of the age. Among them were the descendants of Neapolitan royalty, the most acclaimed poet of the time, Vittoria, a champion of forbidden books, and a religious reformer whom the Pope would have burned alive. Their extraordinary lives illuminate the subtle power wielded by women in fomenting change. I had never heard of them. They'd been forgotten, invisible, and for those of us who write historical fiction, their lives are a treasure trove. Before I begin and plunge deeply into the lives of Vittoria and Costanza d'Avalos, I want to express my gratitude for the direction that scholarly research has taken, delving into the lives of women and their contributions to the Renaissance. But I also want to emphasize that I am a novelist and not a historian. I take what is known and I fill in the gaps created by what is not known with an imagined story, what might have happened. I'd like to share with you a glimpse into the lives of the two women who were at the center of this powerful circle and a driving force in shaping the art of the Renaissance: Costanza d'Avalos and Vittoria Colonna. Next slide. Their lives were closely connected, a result of both war and the political nature of marriage. Costanza is on the left and Vittoria on the right. Next slide. So who was Costanza d'Avalos? She was the spiritual godmother to the circle of dynamic, educated, and independent women I discovered in my research. And it was her court on Ischia that became a model that was then replicated beyond Ischia in Naples, Milan, Rome, Ferrara, and Fondi. She was born in 1460 to a noble Spanish family that had followed King Alfonso V of Aragon to Naples in 1442. The next slide, please. Alfonso the Magnanimous, as he was known, was a patron of the arts and a key figure in the early Renaissance. He transferred his court from Spain to Naples after conquering it, and he drew with him the Spanish nobles like Inigo d'Avalos, who was Costanza's father. As a historical note, Italy in the 15th and 16th centuries was almost constantly at war, with France and Spain vying for dominance of the peninsula. The next slide, please. Just so you can understand, the Kingdom of Naples is the entire southern part of the boot. It also included what's not on this map, Sicily and Sardinia. It was quite extensive in the 15th century. Costanza, next slide, please. Costanza was educated along with her brothers, which was highly unusual, but not only in the humanities, but also in what her father defined as the things that belong to the sons of princes. She learned how to manage assets, how to engage in political correspondence, how to present legal arguments, and how to organize a military operation. Next slide, please. In 1477, at the age of 17, she married Federico del Balzo, the brother of Queen Isabella of Naples. That's who's pictured there on the slide. It was a family connection that gave Costanza important ties to the duchies of Ferrara and Milan, which will factor importantly later in her life. She was widowed at the age of 23 and was wealthy enough to refuse offers of another marriage. The cloak of widowhood provided her with significant freedom to direct her own life. And what I'm going to do right now is read a passage from A Thing Miraculous, which is my novella about Costanza, just to give you a sense of who she was at the time that she was widowed. I thought I had more time. One always does when one is young, strong, beautiful. The bells pealed from the cathedral on my wedding day when I stood on the steps with Federico, my husband, and he raised our hands together in triumph, in acknowledgement of the crowd assembled in the square below. They roared their approval, most likely enhanced by the wine my father had made sure was flowing lavishly from the casks strategically placed around the perimeter. The wedding feast lasted 6 days, 1 day for each year of the marriage. The bells pealed again in that 6th year, but that time for Federico only. I stood alone on the steps, swathed in black, as the hearse and 6 black horses bearing his casket arrived at San Domenico Maggiore. I watched as his soldiers lifted the box and then followed it into the church. After the priest had intoned his requiem in pace and shed drops of holy water across the gaping hole of the crypt, I returned to our villa and endured the muttered phrases and false sympathy of the Neapolitan nobility. I, too, as my father had done, opened the wine casks. It was easier to sustain my facade as the pious, bereft widow when everyone was distracted with good wine. When the mourners were gone, I gave the servants leave for the night, preferring not to have them hovering, witness to both my grief and my relief. I was not suited to be a wife, but it would be some time before I found my bearings as a widow. Next slide, please. After the murder of her father and the death of her brother, she earned the titles of Duchessa and then Principessa when the King of Naples named her governor of the island kingdom of Ischia. Next slide. Costella's court on Ischia was unique in several ways. First, as a fortified island, it offered a safe haven to those threatened by the constant state of war on the Italian peninsula. As a leader, it was written of her that she was known to, quote, maneuver with shrewdness and grace without retreating in the face of powerful adversaries. She used those powerful connections to negotiate for the release of hostages and the establishment of truces. Next slide. Using her pen as her weapon of choice. However, she actually took up arms to defend Ischia. Next slide, please. When it was attacked by the French in the early 1500s, and she also provided a refuge to those fleeing the sack of Rome in 1527. But in addition to building its military strength, Costanza recognized that a kingdom must be more than its cannons and armies, as necessary as they were. She believed there was also power in music, poetry, painting, and sculpture. She was the owner, next slide, She was the owner of a library of more than 130 volumes at a time when most personal libraries contained only a few dozen books. Next slide, please. She established a glittering salon that attracted some of the most brilliant minds in Italy. In some ways, Costanza collected poets and artists as others collected books, although she did collect books. She nurtured and protected them, gave them space to write and paint, buffered their jealousies with her praise, and offered her own spirited challenges to their ideas. She delighted in bringing together poets and philosophers, musicians, and members of the Neapolitan court to generate sparks of creativity, as well as to demonstrate the beauty and artistic richness of her kingdom. Ischio's isolation and idyllic landscape were not only refuge, but also sources of inspiration for those who arrived on her shore. It was a place apart, physically, in its location 18 miles at sea, and in its dramatic volcanic heights. And politically, it was different as a quasi-independent kingdom governed by a woman. It was typical of Costanza's salon that writers and poets often tried out new work. Poems and plays by both established authors and newcomers were performed, read, critiqued, and discussed. The mingling of artists and the elite provided opportunities for relationships that would not have occurred otherwise. And the sampling of new work was a way to develop both interest and sales for both artists and publishers. Costanza was not only a ruler and a patron of the arts. Next slide, please. But she was also a woman who, although childless, raised her orphaned nephew, Ferrante d'Avalos, and was also guardian to his betrothed, Vittoria Colonna, from the time Vittoria was 10 years old. As I have described, Costanza was a woman who wielded extraordinary power and influence politically, culturally, and spiritually at a time when most women had no agency over their lives. She fascinated me, and when I learned of her possible identity as the Mona Lisa, next slide, please, she presented me with an opportunity I could not ignore. The speculation that Costanza d'Avalos was the model for Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa is one of several theories, and while there isn't concrete evidence to definitively support this claim, there are several key pieces of circumstantial evidence that have been cited in favor of this theory. First is a reference in contemporary writing to a, quote, certain Neapolitan woman of great beauty, close quote, widely recognized as Costanza, who was suspected of being the model, perhaps at the request of Giuliano de' Medici, who may or may not have been her lover. Costanza, during her life, was referred to as La Gioconda, which is another name for the Mona Lisa, and reference to a group of verses by the poet Ennio Pino di Parma, in which, infatuated with Costanza, he, the poet, refers to a portrait of her by Leonardo. It is described in loving detail and extravagantly eulogizes the greatness of Da Vinci and the greater worth of Costanza, with her noble and sublime intellect and beautiful eyes. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I am a writer of historical fiction, not a historian. I chose to take the speculation that Costanza might have been the Mona Lisa and delved into creating a possible scenario in which she might have encountered Leonardo, and from that encounter, how he might have chosen to paint her. After some historical sleuthing and a leap based on the interconnectedness by marriage of the leading families of 15th century Italy, I placed them in Milan at the time of Ludovico Sforza's wedding to Beatrice d'Este. Would you, next slide, please. And right now I'm going to read a passage from A Thing Miraculous about how Costanza winds up at this wedding. It was late spring of 1491 when I was counting the payment for the wool shipped to Florence that had arrived via my most trusted condottiero. He had led a contingent of my soldiers to guard the wagons as they wended their way up the spine of Italy, a perilous journey, but less treacherous than the risk of pirates seizing our ship on the Tyrrhenian Sea. I was not expecting anyone else when my chamberlain announced a messenger. I locked away the gold, secured the keys on my belt, and went to greet my unanticipated visitor. The courier was garbed in the colors of the Duke of Milan, and immediately my spine stiffened. Ludovico Sforza was a power to be reckoned with, and I proceeded with caution. There would come a day when I would don armor and raise a sword to defend my castello. But on this day, I could only gird myself with a display of authority and confidence. I was barely civil to the man, my eyebrows raised in questioning what he could possibly be doing in my home. To my utter surprise, he bowed with ceremony and offered me a heavy document sealed with a Sforza dragon. My lady, an invitation to the marriage of my lord the Duke and Beatrice d'Este. Beatrice d'Este was the niece of Costanza's sister-in-law, Queen Isabella of Naples. Given Costanza's relationship to the bride, it is likely she attended the wedding. And there is no doubt that Leonardo was present. Next slide, please. He was well established in Ludovico's court, where he had successfully sought Ludovico's patronage, and the extravaganza of parades, entertainment, decorations, and food that comprised the wedding was Leonardo's creation. I never knew it, but Leonardo da Vinci was a wedding planner. The intellectual journey that Costanza and Leonardo undertake in my story, A Thing Miraculous, is based not only on what I had learned of Costanza's profound influence in the arts and her involvement in the lives of the artists she welcomed to Ischia, but also in my reading of scholarship interpreting Leonardo's notebooks. The conversations he and Costanza have are imagined, but the ideas they discuss have their source in Leonardo's own words and Costanza's passion for the arts. Next slide, please. I'm going to read another passage from A Thing Miraculous. One afternoon in his studio, we were discussing his passionate search for symmetry, the underlying unity he saw between humanity and nature. To show me what he meant, he spread out a map of the Italian peninsula marked with rivers, and beside it his drawing of a human body, delineating what he explained to me were the blood vessels that carried the very essence of life. Do you see the connection? He asked me. He bent over the table, tracing with his fingers the rivers emerging from the heart and traveling to the outstretched arms and legs of the human figure. He looked back at me and I saw the delight in his eyes as my own eyes registered the recognition of the relationship. I held out my own hands and studied the blue tracery of veins that echoed Da Vinci's drawing. It's not only that what lies beneath the skin that fascinates me, he said. There is so much I want to show you. The proportions of the natural world reverberate with the same dimensions as the human body. I see it everywhere. When I paint a portrait or design a structure, I'm constantly applying the relationships I see between the wider world and the world of our bodies. We whirled from one topic to another, an exhilarating foray into the unknown that at times felt like a race in which I was trying to match his stride. At other quieter times, we sat with our goblets of wine by the fireside, and we meandered over the territory of emotions and how he endeavored to convey them in his paintings. Just as the veins carry our lifeblood within the body, he said, the spirit resides within as well. It is my responsibility to give the soul expression with my art. I must provide anger or pain or fear or desire with an outward and visible manifestation. Next slide, please. Oh, that's not the next slide. That's the Mona Lisa is the next slide. That's the one I want. Thank you. Costanza d'Avalos was a woman who could take up arms and defend her kingdom, raise children who were not her own, charm politicians, poets, and popes, and open her mind with fervor and curiosity to new ideas that challenged the status quo in art. I would like to believe that based on her brilliance and her beauty, she forged a connection with Leonardo da Vinci and sat for one of the most iconic portraits in the world. Next slide, please. Costanza's influence was most profound on the celebrated poet Vittoria Colonna. Vittoria came to Ischia as a girl of 10, sent there for safety from war. As an infant, she'd been betrothed to Ferrante d'Avalos, Marchese di Pescara, and the orphaned nephew of Costanza, whom Costanza had raised from the time he was an infant. Next slide. Vittoria was the daughter of Fabrizio Colonna, a legendary military leader and head of one of the oldest Roman families. Her mother, Agnese di Montefeltro, was the daughter of Federico de Montefeltro and Battista Sforza, the Duke and Duchess of Urbino, whose court was a renowned cultural center and the setting for Castiglione's book, The Book of the Courtier. Battista was one of the 15th century's learned women, fluent in Greek and Latin, and an orator who had delivered an oration before the Pope at the age of 4. When Federico was away fighting, Battista was described as ruling the state, quote, with great prudence and spirit, unquote. She instilled in her 6 daughters the same passion for education that it had informed her life, and they in turn saw that their daughters were educated in the humanist tradition. When Vittoria arrived on Ischia in 1500 at the age of 10, she was fleeing a conflict between the Colonna family and the Borgia Pope Alexander VI. She grew up on the island under Costanza's tutelage, exposed to the challenging ideas and experimentation with literary forms that marked Costanza's salon. By the time Vittoria and Ferrante married in 1509, she was ready not only to step into the role of hostess to the literary luminaries who flocked to Ischia, but she was also composing poetry herself. Next slide. Ferrante d'Avalos, her husband, as a commander in the imperial army of Charles V, was away for long periods of time, leading Vittoria to develop a life apart from him, both as a writer and as an intellectual partner to the men she hosted. After she was widowed in 1525, at the age of 35, her literary fame began to spread, thanks to in great part to the dissemination of her work by the cultural lions who had frequented the Ischia Salon, among them the historian Paolo Giovio and the poet Pietro Bimbo. Next slide, please. Vittoria was at the heart of a literary moment in Italian history. The publication of her Rime in 1538 was the first publication of its kind by a woman under her own name. Between 1540 and 1560, women writers in Italy became a significant segment of the literary scene. By the end of the 16th century, over 200 women had published work. Not only women writers were active in the cultural sphere, women were also visible and recognized as patrons of the arts, supporting the discovery and publication of the poets and writers first identified in the salons that were founded by women. As a widow, Vittoria traveled frequently throughout Italy, staying in convents and holding forth at salons that she hosted. For noble women alone, convents were safe and respectable havens where they could live independently as guests and still entertain. It was during this time period that she met Michelangelo. The next slide, please. And began a profound relationship with him that originated in their longing for spiritual fulfillment. I'm now going to read a passage from my book, Love That Moves the Sun, which explores Vittoria's life and her relationship as a soulmate to Michelangelo. I'm going to read to you when they first encounter each other. It's at the Vatican. Vittoria is in the Sistine Chapel. This is many years after Michelangelo has painted the ceiling, but he has just been commissioned by the Pope Clement to paint the altar wall with the Last Judgment. So they are both in the Sistine Chapel, and he sees her as she is about to leave. Michelangelo detects in the poet almost a reluctance to leave the chapel. When she reaches the doorway, she stops and faces him. At first, he assumes she's paused for a final glance at the ceiling. It is what people often do, although he himself never wishes to contemplate the fresco again after the years he spent painting it. But the poet does not look up. She regards him with intention, not accidentally, as if her gaze is focused on something else and he happens to fall into her line of sight. No, she has deliberately altered her path to see him. He studies her as purposefully and knowingly as she considers him. She intrigues him. Poems have made their way to Florence and have certainly been a topic of discussion in his circle. But she is an enigma, despite the grief and deeply felt emotion revealed in her words. Her beauty, tinged with ineffable sadness, is remote, detached. That he sees all this in the flash of time since she moved past him and then turned to face him astonishes him. With her glance alone, she appears to be offering this insight into her. She is pursuing something of that he is sure, and she seems to be seeking it in him. He cannot avert his eyes. He has never before encountered a woman with such a direct and compelling gaze. She conveys a power and authority that both unnerves him and makes him hungry to be engulfed. A few days after that encounter, Vittoria basically finagles an invitation from the Pope to visit Michelangelo in his garden. And he's showing her some sketches, and she, in looking at one, sees on the corner of the sketch of, what he used to do was draw lots of faces and arms and various things on a large sheet of paper. And she sees her own image in a corner of the paper. And this is her response to that after she's left the garden. When I saw the face he'd sketched in red chalk on a corner of the page, I recognized both my image and my longing. Since the death of my husband, I live behind a mask, surrounded by the convent walls of San Silvestro here in Rome, or atop the impregnable Castello d'Aragonese on Ischia. I allow no one, not my family, not my friends, not the literary world that passes my manuscripts from hand to hand, to breach the defenses that protect me from memory and loss. And yet this one sees me, pierces me with his perceptive insight. How long did the unspoken pass between us when I turned to him in the Sistine Chapel? Surely not more than a minute or two. I knew who he was, standing there before the blank wall, simmering after his sharp words with the Pope. But how does he know me, to enable him to recognize my heart, to convey it in those brief, spare strokes? I find myself terrified, challenged, awakened. I retreat from Michelangelo's garden, from the frivolous but useful Cardinal de' Medici, and from the page of sketches, dropping it back onto the table as if it declared my secrets. I go back to my guest quarters at the convent of San Silvestro, and I lose myself in my words, trying to recapture in poetry what he has revealed with a piece of chalk held in a lined and color-stained hand. Next slide, please. They express their emotional intimacy in letters, poetry, and drawings. Among their gifts for one another, Vittoria prepared a hand-copied and bound edition of her poetry, which, by the way, was on display at the Metropolitan Museum of Art a few years ago when they did a mammoth Michelangelo exhibit. I'm now going to read a passage from Love That Moves the Sun about the creation of this book. During the fall, I work in secret with Innocenza on a gift from Michelangelo, a bound collection of my poems, each one selected with love and care and placed in an order that had special meaning for us, rather than the order in which I'd written them. Innocenza spends painstaking hours copying them in her beautiful hand, because I have no intention of placing the work with a printer. This collection is for Michelangelo alone, and I guard it with my heart. Every evening after the pages are dry, I read them, my fingers tracing the words as if I were writing them anew. Captured within the strokes and flourishes of Innocenza's pen are my questioning and doubt and discovery and revelation. Our own humanity and frailty, Michelangelo's and mine, reflected in Christ's journey. Our search for transcendence as we contemplate his sacrifice, the triumph of his crucifixion as the ultimate act of love. I put the sheets away in the chest as they accumulate, and then I wipe the tears from my eyes. Next slide, please. Michelangelo wrote sonnets for Vittoria and drew a powerful Pietà, the original of which hangs in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. The next slide. Next slide, please. The Pietà is on the left, and that is a portrait that Michelangelo drew of Vittoria on the right. Vittoria's influence on Michelangelo's work is most pronounced in his Last Judgment. Next slide, please. Which reflects her interpretation of the Gospel of Saint Matthew. Michelangelo appealed to Vittoria to help him to interpret the Gospel, and so that he could create his vision based on Saint Matthew's Gospel. And this is a passage from Love That Moves the Sun when they are discussing whether or not she will help him. Michelangelo has written to her, "It would be a great service to me and to the Pope if I might turn to you for advice on the imagery for the Last Judgment. Just as you can imagine no one better to paint it, I can identify no one better to be my guide in interpreting Christ's second coming." After she receives this letter, she thinks about it. The two warring parts of me concerning Michelangelo grapple with each other for supremacy in the decision. I want to retreat to the solitude and isolation of Ischia. At the same time, I want to explore the truths of the Last Judgment with a mind as inquisitive and hungry as my own. No defenses protect me from the compelling spirit who seems to know me as surely as he sees the shape of a limb or the anguish on a mother's face in a block of stone. I agree to meet him on a Sunday afternoon in the garden of the Church of San Silvestro. "What do you know of me that you would entrust me to be your guide?" I ask the moment I see him. "I have read your poems. I've seen your face." In the end, I agree to his request, but I'm adamant that I will not be the guide to his pilgrim. We are to make this journey together as equals, complete with debate and disagreement. "I will not be your teacher," I say. "I'm no expert, only a fellow traveler seeking the same answers as you. But I don't know what questions to ask." "You know more than you realize. You see things, Maestro, in ways that the rest of us cannot even imagine." "You've worn me down, my lady. I accept this mutual partnership you are proposing. If we are to be partners, however, I must ask you not to call me Maestro, but Michelangelo." I hesitate. We've moved very quickly to a level of intimacy in our conversation that I have not experienced with others, man or woman. But I consent to his request. The intensity of their relationship and the emotional intimacy they shared with each other lasted until the moment of Vittoria's death, where it is known that Michelangelo remained at her side, reciting his sonnets to her. Next slide, please. To end, I'm going to read the epilogue from Love That Moves the Sun. The Cesarini garden is blue-gray in the winter dusk. Un campo azzurro, he reflects, like the note he'd written to her long ago on paper the color of the raised flower beds below her window. He remembers her smile at his little jokes, her laughter when he sang, coming down from the mountain that day he brought her home from Viterbo. He turns from the window and adds a log to the fire. The room is cold. Her lips will turn as blue as the garden if he does not work quickly. There was a time when she didn't need the fire because she was the fire, a radiant blaze that burned and nourished him. Behind him, she sleeps. The priest had been there earlier with incense and chrism and candle flame. She can no longer swallow and so didn't take communion. Out in the corridor, a nun prays a novena. Another will relieve her in an hour. He has no prayers left, but he stays. He will allow no one to take his place. The wood catches and he adds another log as flames creep along the edge of the blackening timber. Despite the heat emanating from the hearth, he feels his own fire dwindling to ash. Without her as his spark, he grows cold. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I-
That was beautiful.
Thank you, Linda. Just realized two Lindas there. That was really beautiful and really informative. So Eleanor could read some questions, but I actually had one that I put in the chat. I was really amazed when you said that I think by the end of the 16th century, there were over 200 published women writers.
Yes.
And how well known is this fact? I haven't heard that before, and how that during that time and also now, and are some of their works extant? Would we recognize some of these?
Yeah, there's so there are a number of scholars now who are really delving into the literature of these women. So there are several books available on women writers of the Renaissance, and they were in several different countries, but certainly that number comes from my research on just the women of Italy who were writing at that time.
Mhm.
Yeah. And one of the things about the 16th century is there was an explosion of published work. There was a printer in Venice who was predominantly the printer that was printing the work of women. What happened, though, as the century moved on, is that the church became completely entrenched in trying to fight the Reformation and Martin Luther and Protestantism, and there was a very conservative pope who basically, as I said, there was one of the women in this Ischia circle and living in with Costanza, who the Pope wanted to burn as a heretic. I mean, many of the women were exploring their spiritual lives, right, in a way that was at odds with the patriarchal rulers of the church, and that frightened the church. And there was an Italian Inquisition that was developed. And books were burned, and so a lot of the work of these women disappeared as the century proceeded because of what was happening with the Inquisition.
That's amazing because, and during one of our annual events, at Tableau, we tell the stories of women who we admire in our past and how we pass them on. Adriana Trigiani always says that in the pages of history, 50% of the population is missing because women aren't written into the history. This is one example. So, and maybe, I don't know, may go back and justify that. I never heard of an Italian Inquisition before, but that is really something that we can look into further, or maybe your next book.
Pat,
So,
there's a question in the chat room. There's a
I'm
question.
sorry.
There's a question in the chat, Pat.
Okay, all right. So, Eleanor, you want to find the next
Yes.
question?
Yes, I was just waiting for Linda to finish. So Kathleen Anuli says that she thought that Michelangelo was an homosexual. So she's thinking what kind of a relationship can be developed between the two.
Yes.
Maybe more an intimate one than a
Yes.
sexual one.
Yeah. So it's their relationship in terms of whether or not it was yes, he was definitely known to be a homosexual. However, their emotional intimacy was so intense, and one of the interesting stories is that on his deathbed, on Michelangelo's deathbed, he told the friend who went on to write his biography to burn the letters from Vittoria, that he didn't, that to protect her reputation, he wanted to destroy. And so there's only about 6 or 7 letters that actually survived between the two of them. So it is entirely speculative whether or not they had a physical relationship, but they certainly had an intensely intimate relationship emotionally, intellectually. They were soulmates. They were and they often, there are recorded conversations that they had. They used to meet on Sunday afternoons in the garden of San Silvestro and argue about things. And there was often somebody else there, and there was a young person who went on to record those conversations that he was a part of, and they would joke about, it was as if they were married because of the way they would bicker with one another and how well they knew each other. So it's not at all clear whether or not they had a physical relationship. And also remember, she was in her late 30s, he was in his 50s, 60s when they met. They weren't sort of young and full of sexual energy at the time that they met. They'd both lived a long lives, but the intensity of their relationship is not in dispute. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We don't have other questions for the moment. I don't know if anyone from the audience wants to ask something.
I can tell you that in the back matter of Love That Moves the Sun, there is a bibliography if anyone is really interested in learning more about these women and the other women who were part of their circle. There are several scholarly books and articles that are available if you're interested in learning more about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have Betty Santangelo speaking. I don't have a question, but I wanted to tell you that I Love That Moves the Sun was just a fabulous, wonderful book. And
Thank you, Betty.
I
Thank you.
it reads so beautifully, and it just stayed with me for a long time, just
It stays with me as well, and it took me 8 years to write it, to do the research and to write
Well, the
it.
research, I mean, you believe everything, and you can just imagine women whose husband off at war and trying to build a life. And I think the fact that she was in Ischia is how she was able to create that kind of life, because she was far away from a lot of parts of Italy, right? That's how I
Exactly.
interpret it. And I haven't read it in years now, but it was so beautiful. I just thought it was one of the best books I've ever read. So I just wanted
Thank
to
you.
compliment you on it.
Thank you. And it's true. I mean, I went to Ischia twice to do the research, and I sort of talk about having walked in Vittoria's footsteps. And it's the citadel is literally at the top of
Yeah.
sort of volcanic rock, and its isolation certainly contributed to the power that Costanza had, and the fact that her father was murdered and then her brother died after she was widowed. There was no one else that the king could trust to rule it, and so it was given to her to rule. Yeah, which was just a very unusual, but not.
Is Ischia worth going to see? Because we're thinking about it. We're thinking
Yes.
about yes.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, like it's a short boat ride from Naples. I mean, I think it took maybe, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. It's only 18 miles. There is, and I had a wonderful tour guide, Kathleen Guillermo. I don't know if she's still
Yes,
in
of course.
Uruguay. So Kathleen, who has, that Ease into Italy travel company, she's the one who set up the guide for me, who was amazing. And she just, she spent the entire day. We went from the bottom, from the, all the way to the top. We walked to the top of the mountain, and she was full of stories about Vittoria. So yeah, it's well, Ischia is well, and it's got beautiful beaches. It has beautiful beaches and beautiful churches. It's not just the Castello.
Right.
There's a lot there, and it's got the sulfur baths. So like my great grandmother used to go to Ischia in August to soak in the sulfur baths. That
Yeah.
was one of the things she did. Yeah.
Okay. Diane, I see your hand is raised. Do you have a question?
I very much enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much. I
Thank
was
you.
wondering, and I was a few minutes late in getting started, so maybe you addressed this at the outset. Forgive me if
Mhm.
I'm repeating something, but what motivated you, or what stimulated your interest in these particular women?
So the origin story is when I realized that so many of the women artists of the Renaissance already had like books written about them. I found there's a museum in Washington, D.C. called the Museum of Women in the Arts. It's just all the only thing it exhibits is art by women. And they had, at the time that I had started my research, they had just completed an exhibition of Italian women artists. And there was a catalog, which I bought. And within that catalog, there were several scholarly articles, not only about the artists, but about women like Vittoria, who were patrons of the arts and who commissioned one of there was a specific article about Vittoria commissioning a painting by Titian of Mary Magdalene. And so when she sort of intrigued me, and so I found out a little bit more, and then I found out she was a poet. And then when I found a couple of biographies that were written of her in the 18th and 19th centuries, and discovered the significant role that Costanza had played in her life, that each layer that got peeled back gave me more insight into what the lives of women that I had absolutely no knowledge about. I had never heard of Vittoria before. I'd never heard of Costanza before. And their very lives and what they did fascinated me. And so, but I stumbled upon them because there was this exhibition. Somebody else had done the work before me, the art historians, of putting together this exhibition of Renaissance women artists, and then this amazing catalog, which had articles about both of them. So that's where it came from. Yeah, and it's sort of how, as a writer of historical fiction, that's kind of how I work. I mean, I have perhaps the seed of an idea, and then I just start diving in, and each time I find an article or a book, it leads me in another direction, and there's something else to learn, and somebody else who's identified that I'd never heard of, and before I know it, I have a story. And the whole idea of Costanza possibly being the Mona Lisa came out of that research. That I had a wonderful, actually, there were two research librarians at my local library who were thrilled to help me. And I bless librarians every day, because they are amazing in being able to find really obscure information. One of the articles, my library has a subscription to a sort of a network of scholarly articles that's impossible for an individual like myself to afford. But But they can, if I find a summary of an article that looks like it might be interesting to me, I would give it to the librarian, and she would go into to the database and pull out and then print out the article for me. And that is how it was in one of those articles that I saw this theory that's been sort of put forth that she might have been the Mona Lisa.
Well, thank you very much. And I just wanted to say, listening to you talking about how one link leads to another, I've been on that route too. And sometimes you wind up in cat videos quite unexpectedly. So I appreciate that you brought it to a much higher outcome.
So Linda, another question.
Yeah.
What's your theory? Do you think she was the Mona Lisa?
Excuse me, I didn't understand the whole.
What is your theory? Do you think she really
What is
was
my
the Mona
theory?
Lisa?
So, I would love to believe that she's the Mona Lisa. And I do think that in terms of how she interacted with artists and poets, that it's very likely that she and Leonardo da Vinci crossed paths. It took me a lot of sort of, you should see I had to do a spreadsheet to sort of figure out the connections that might have, and the point at which they might have met, which would be that the wedding, the Sforza wedding in Milan. But he was in Naples at a certain time, and in fact, I do write that into the book, because he does come out to Ischia from Naples to bring her this painting. And by the way, there's more than one. There are two Mona Lisas. And so that is why I think it might be possible that she is one of the two. But I do, there's really a debate among art scholars, and they can get very intense about it. And I've just chosen to choose one side because, as a historical novelist, I can make stuff up. And so that's what I chose to do, because it's just it's an interesting story that is possible. It's possible.
And what about the other Mona Lisa? Pat is asking, where is she? The other Mona Lisa.
That is the wife of some Florentine, sort of middle class person. The Lisa something. I don't remember her last name. But so there's a strong case that she is, and there are some letters that indicate that that there was maybe a bill sent to this merchant for the painting of his wife. So there's evidence on both sides.
Where is the painting? Do you know where the painting?
There's a Mona Lisa in the Louvre, and there's a Mona Lisa in England. So
Okay.
there's two. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's lots of other theories about who it might be.
Yeah.
But
Even Leonardo himself, right?
Leonardo himself, Leonardo's mother. There's all kinds of theories. But I just chose the most interesting one because it makes a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do a beautiful job of recreating history for us, and
Thank you.
and showing how strong women were and could be.
Yeah, and I think that's it's certainly a message to us, because I think that we forget that they may have been bound by certain restrictions, but they found ways to get around them, particularly at this time period when their husbands were all going off to war and getting killed,
Right.
so that and remember too, most of the marriages were political. Vittoria's marriage with Ferrante was a political arrangement. The King of Naples, okay, Vittoria's father switched sides from fighting for the French to fighting for the Spanish. And in order to secure his loyalty, the King of Spain, right, through the king of Naples, demanded and required the marriage of his daughter to a Spanish nobleman to secure his Colonna's loyalty. And so it was only it was very unusual that Vittoria and Ferrante knew each other from the time they were 10 years old and were raised in the same place by Costanza. So they already had formed a relationship as children, so that by the time they were married, they were not strangers to each other. And also they were the same age, which was again very unusual at this time, when often, remember, childbirth was very dangerous. Women died young, and their husbands would marry again. And quite often the husband would be quite many years older, and the girls were being married at 15, 16, 17 years old. So Costanza was 17, Vittoria was 19, which is actually old for a first marriage. But that, again, there were sort of these unusual aspects of her life and Vittoria and Costanza's life that laid the groundwork for the power that they were able to achieve in their lives. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
What did you-
fascinating. Thank you. I'm holding the book in my hand,
Yeah.
and I will start reading this. I truly enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love doing this kind of thing. It's really, I love all aspects of what I do. I mean, I love the research, I love writing the stories, but I also love talking about them to people, who are interested and want to know more. So it's a real joy to me. And I thank you all for listening to me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we thank you for coming in and sharing this knowledge with us and giving us new insight into women from that period that we never knew about. Some of us read the book, so I guess we knew some of them
Yeah.
before. But
I
it's
have to
great
know
to
if you
keep.
can see. Let me see if you can see this. Let's see. Can you see?
Is it the other book?
No, it's up there above my mantle. That is the
Oh.
original artwork. It's the original artwork for the cover.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank
The
you.
What's your current book now? The current book?
the new book?
Yes.
It's okay, just a second.
Is that it? Paint the Wind? Is that it?
This is it. Paint the Wind. Yeah, Paint the Wind. Yeah.
Or is that it? Where does that take place?
This takes place in Vienna and Greece between 1907 and 1916. And then there's an afterward that takes place in the 1970s. It's actually the seed for the idea was my husband's great aunt, Tanta Maya. She was the wife of a well-known German painter, and she ran a salon in Berlin to charm clients so that they would commission him to paint their portraits. She this vivacious and incredibly talented woman and beautiful. And after he passed away, she became an artist herself. And I met her when she was 90 years old. And just, she was just one of those women that you say, that's who I want to be when I'm 90. I mean, she was just incredible. And so I always had this idea in the back of my head that would be interesting to write a story about a woman who, starts out as a muse and supporting and nurturing the career of a man who's an artist, and then being seized with the desire to, paint herself. And so that's the origin of the story. I decided to place it in Vienna at the beginning of the 20th century because that was the time of Gustav Klimt and Oskar Kokoschka and Egon Schiele. It was an incredibly rich and vibrant time in art, but also in music. It was the time of Mahler. It was the time of Freud. Vienna, from like 1900 until the First World War was just seething with culture and art and direction that was sort of the avant-garde, and things were just sort of turning their back on everything that was classical, and there was just this foment going on. And so that's why I chose to put the story at that time.
Interesting. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. I guess I don't think there are any more questions.
We're done.
But you can always, I guess, address them to the office in email and we can get them to Linda if you have. But thank you all for coming. It's, a little bit late in the hour, but I really appreciate everybody coming and just, I hope that if you're not already, you are consider becoming members of NOYA so you can see more presentations like this. And we welcome people from around the country now because of the grace of virtual meetings, but we also have some local ones in Florida. I see Rosemary who joined me at some events in Florida and Boston and we're gonna do satellite offices. And so our Tabla event this year on October 22nd, well, supposedly we'll have a table in New Jersey, Connecticut, and I'm blanking where the other one is. I think outside of Boston in
Yes,
Concord.
yes.
Yeah, but we're looking at anybody who has ideas, wants to help us organize another meeting. It'd be great. It's always great to connect in person.
And
So
we have
thank you.
we have the walking tour, Little Italy, on October 25th.
Right, great. Thank you. I think we have some other meetings coming up. I'm not even sure, but we will look forward to hopefully get the newsletter, if not sign up for it and keep in touch. So great. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us and hope to see you again at another meeting. Bye, Camilla.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Linda. Very, very good. Thank you.
Bye.
Right, I guess.
Can you leave?
Yeah, you can leave. I didn't interfere, everybody. You just hit the
Minute leave button.
at the yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. And Linda, do you have any other questions? We have, I guess, two more people still on, but if they hopefully we answered everybody else's questions. So I'm gonna probably end the meeting soon. But we can talk afterwards if you want to.
Okay.
Thank you again. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.